So we have the option for the poor. This is a term that has become very common, very current in Latin American church circles, that the gospel itself is good news to the poor. Jesus, quoting from Isaiah 61, from the prophet Isaiah, in his first sermon in Nazareth, quoted, basically read this passage from Isaiah 61. Clearly, the option for the poor is very well established, very well founded in both the Hebrew scriptures and in our New Testament. This means that the church makes an option in favor of the poor. That is, the poor are those who are in need of help, in need of liberation. And so we try to do what we can to support their efforts at freedom and liberation, to have a more decent life, to have some justice and peace in their life. And so we favor the what would help the poor. This has become very important to me in my own experience, especially here in Nicaragua. We become friends with the poor and the needy and the oppressed. So we become friends. We can never fully identify people like myself with privileged access to medical care, for instance, in the US or things like that. We can never fully identify. We shouldn't kid ourselves into thinking that we are one of the poor, one of the oppressed. But we can become friends, and that has been very meaningful in my life. I feel that I've become friends with many of the people. And then in our Christian-based communities, which are small church groups, there I know people very personally, they know me, and we become friends. So then our work is not something that is difficult to do or something that we need to make all kinds of efforts to do. It's working with my friends for a better life for all. So it would become friends. And Gustavo Gutierrez, one of the leading theologians, he just died recently, kind of the father of liberation theology, so to speak, a Peruvian priest theologian who wrote a famous book called The Theology of Liberation in about 1970. He emphasizes this very much, that we become friends with the people. And then it's not a great task, it's not difficult to be with them and to help and to minister, because we like one another. We like being together and working together for the common good. Gustavo Gutierrez also makes a very strong point in saying that we, the church leaders especially, should not be the voice of the poor. He challenges that notion, which has also become quite common, the church as the voice of the poor. He says, no, the poor have their own, the poor and oppressed, the exploited, the sick, the hungry, they have their own voice. And what we need to do is to try to give a microphone to them to make their voices heard in society, and especially in high places, in positions of power and influence. So we should not be the voice of the poor, but rather the microphones or the electronic speakers of their voice, to do what we can to facilitate the hearing of their voice, speaking for themselves and working for liberation of themselves, working for what they feel that they need, not what we think would be best for them, but facilitating them having the power to work for their own betterment in ways that they feel is necessary, so that they can have influence and be able to structure their own future.
There's one question from Caden. Oh, well, but it's kind of the question that will ask you to say the rest of your talk. What is your main ideology for Luke's gospel?
Okay. Well, ideology can be understood as a political vision, a vision for politics that we need to have. Certainly, Luke's gospel is one of the is probably the strongest in its emphasis on the option for the poor. So that means that the church, those of us who consider ourselves followers, disciples, and ministers of the gospel of Jesus, need to work in a way that will bring about a better life for the vast majority of the people of the world, and including the poor and the underserved, the underprivileged in the US and in Europe and in other places. So it's that basic option for the poor. And I should mention that makes me think it's a good question. We're not just talking about handouts, we're not just talking about one-to-one acts of charity, which are extremely important. But I mean, Jesus himself said in the Last Judgment scene in Matthew 25, when I was hungry, you gave me to eat. When I was thirsty, you gave me to drink. When I was naked, you clothed me. When I was homeless or a stranger, you took me in. Those can be done in individual one-to-one ways, or you can have a church community, for instance, having a soup kitchen or some sort of clinic to help people individually. But also just think of the tremendous changes that can be made for the good of vast numbers of people who are hurting if we can change political and social and economic structures. So I think that sort of gets into ideology, because then you would say, well, on what sort of model? But I think that's a very important point, that it's not just individual handouts, it's not just individual service, which is good and absolutely necessary. I do a lot of that myself. But I came to Nicaragua to work with the Christian-based communities in what we call what I've said referred to as the option for the poor, and using liberation theology, because I felt that the Christian-based communities here were supporting a revolutionary movement that I felt was very promising. I thought was very promising. The revolutionary movement here that overthrew Somoza in 1979, and then all during the 80s was struggling. I thought there were 3 priests in the government who believed in the potential of change with that government, the Sandinista government. But I think that's important to work for structural, systemic change.